If there's one constant with the Final Fantasy series, apart from how I love reusing the same intro again and again in my FF videos, it's the fact that the fanbase love engaging in polite and thoughtful conversations about which Final Fantasy game is the best, the cream of the crop. We too have our picks, and because we have our own website and scheduled show, we are usually right about these things. We've put a lot of thought in ranking all the main Final Fantasy entries, and deciding which ones are glorified to Knights of the Round status or Hironobu Sakaguchi tier. Truth be told, after dealing with the bottom 5, it's hard to sift through what's the best. Since it's still Moogle March, we're going upwards this time. Just remember, we're dealing only with Mothership FF titles. As much as Dissidia NT, Crisis Core FF7, FF Brave Exvius, and FF Tactics deserves to be here, they're considered spin-offs, so we have to keep it within the mainline games. Alright, before I start, I just want you guys to help subscribe to our channel and click on that notification bell icon to get updated. We post vids every Wednesday and Friday without fail. Thanks again for tuning in. Let's start! Number 5. Final Fantasy IV. Most fans remember Part 4 more for its characters and story, and why not? The game's cast is clearly defined and have specific jobs and skill sets to round up the party compositions. However, the fourth Mothership title is renowned for its expanded scope, its bold new step into the Super Nintendo era, and also its fighting. FF4 introduced the game's staple active time battle system, which led to fast-paced combat with that turn-based option selecting feel. You can opt to switch it back to turn-based mode, but where's the fun in that? This change alone helped set the precedent for other Final Fantasy games in the future. Also, the silly and melodramatic narrative of the series is in its base form here, tropes and all. The love triangle, the self-sacrifices, the personal journeys of self-discovery, all of it came from Part 4. Number 4. Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. What a difference a few years can make. The revamp of Final Fantasy XIV, subtitled A Realm Reborn, just to make sure you're not mixing it up with that piece of shit game in the last video, was met with universal acclaim. It's also still going on strong, with its expansions Heavensward, Stormblood, and Shadowbringers adding in even more content for MMO players to play with. Many of the boss fights and dungeons are lovely nods and throwbacks to past Final Fantasy titles. The game's class system and combat go hand in hand within a group context of an MMO. And above all, the new FF14 universe is a packed world that's worth exploring and spending loads of time with. FF14 A Realm Reborn is the best mass multiplayer online version of a Final Fantasy game that's currently online as we speak. Provided that you have the time and dedication to pay a monthly subscription fee for a game, you should jump in without fail. Number 3. Final Fantasy V. The fifth game in the series takes the best parts of Part 1 and 3, and basically makes it into a much more fun, enjoyable, and most importantly, fair experience. FF5 is Hironobu Sakaguchi's last directorial FF work before handing over the reins to the new FF lead, Yoshinori Kitase. And hot damn, it's quite a send-off. The patented job system is where the game is at, with more jobs and more flexibility to the system. Boss fights and mob battles are more strategic and creative, requiring you to change up your jobs to effectively fight them. If you're looking for the best version of a traditional Final Fantasy game without the design errors of past titles, Final Fantasy V is perfect to cater to that experience. FF9 is fine and all for that, but FF5 keeps it very real. Number 2. Final Fantasy XII. You cannot go wrong with this iteration of Final Fantasy, a series known for breaking new ground and taking risks. FF12 is a combination of that design philosophy as it introduced an open world that is interconnected with one another and a real-time-ish combat system that is reminiscent of your MMO fares. You aren't given a clear directive on where to go when you start heading out into the wilderness. But that's the beauty of it. Many sections of the game are purposely littered with a high-level monster so that the game leads you to the quote-unquote correct destination without outright telling you. Landmarks and mob placements help guide you so that you can figure out the path on your own. The game also introduces the gambit system for combat. You basically set a bunch of commands to make your player characters attack and cast magic depending on the situation in the field. Yes, you can program the game to play itself, but there are many boss fights and special battles that will force you to retweak your gambit settings and even perform commands on the fly. These features, coupled with the grand story of political intrigue, actually makes FF12 better with age. Honestly speaking, this entry encompasses the core value of a Final Fantasy title, the fact that it attempts to break new ground in the jrpg market while also keeping true to its Magic and Fantasy D&D inspired roots. Oh, and the soundtrack is also a thing of beauty. And number 1, Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI takes the old and the new, blends them together, and then amps it up further with great production values and game design that even hold up until today. How often have you had the second half of a game open up to you right after a world-ending catastrophe, and then having to split up into 3 groups to tackle its last dungeon? And how often does a game let its chief antagonist go from literal court jester to nihilistic megalomaniac who actually succeeds in his plan for world domination? Not many, I'll tell you that. FF6 did this in the mid-90s and somehow it still resonates to fans and JRPG players to this day. Speaking of groups, FF6 has to this day the largest playable cast ever assembled for an FF game. Unlike other RPGs of that magnitude, every single one of them gets fleshed out and have their time in the spotlight, provided you do your diligence in playing through their side quests. In short, Final Fantasy VII is the best game among the mothership titles because it is the full package. It is an epic roller coaster ride that you will remember from start to finish. And that is all for our quick feature on the all-time best mainline Final Fantasy games ever. If you think we're wrong for some peculiar reason, or if you want to show your support, do subscribe to us and click on the notification button to get updated, or even comment on this particular video. Tell us your likes and dislikes. Tell us your favorite Final Fantasy game. We're more than willing to listen. Until then, may your fantasies never end.